Assalamu alaikum, my friends, and welcome to my last video of my Morocco series. This is the pros and cons of living in Tangier. I spent just about a month in this amazing Moroccan city, just 15 kilometers from the Spanish border in the north. It's a truly incredible place with so many pros, but some very realistic cons. So if you want to hear some real talk travel advice, come along, let's do it. Yalla. Before I get into the content, I wanted to let you guys know that I am on Patreon. You can hit the link up here if you want to support my travels. I'm going to do some membership-only Q&As as well as content specifically for those who are looking to travel abroad and live abroad, just like I do as a digital nomad. If you would like and subscribe to the video now before we get into the content, that would be great. Leave a comment. I'll definitely respond to it. So, yalla, let's get to the content. The first pro I want to talk about is the European vibe that you'll find in Tangier. Now, historically, Tangier is quite different than the other Moroccan cities because it was an international city for quite a long period of time after World War I and before the Moroccan kingdom was established. That means that the French were there, the Spanish were there, the Americans were there, many different European powers, as well as the African influence. So you have a city where the center feels very European, much more so than what you would find in the rest of Morocco. So this means you can find this kind of cosmopolitan vibe that a lot of Moroccans like to come to Tangier specifically for. You can find bars that are a little bit more, let's say, westernized. You can find places that remind you a little bit of life maybe in Spain or in Portugal. And it's a really unique vibe that you wouldn't necessarily get living in Marrakesh, living in Casablanca. This sort of European positioning you can really feel as it is so close to Spain. Like on a clear day, you can legitimately see Spain, not only the coastline, but the mountains. Maybe you could even wave to the people. So this kind of nearness to Europe and this historical connection to Europe creates this really multicultural vibe, which you don't necessarily get in a lot of the other Moroccan cities. However, Tangier, in comparison to Rabat and Casablanca, is actually, oddly enough, a bit more conservative. You'll find more, for example, men wearing the traditional jalaba, which is that like traditional kind of hooded shirt that Moroccan men wear, and you'll actually see more women in hijabs than you would in the capital. This was surprising to me, but it is something that is just very true about the city. So the big pro is that it's really multicultural and very comfortable if you're a foreigner. The second pro for Tangier is that the city itself is a lot less chaotic and aggressive than other Moroccan cities. If you travel to Fez, Marrakesh, Essaouira, or some of the more southern cities, the people tend to be pretty aggressive. But as it is a really international, multicultural area, if you stay out of the Medina, which is the old city center, people will pretty much leave you alone, and it feels like much more modernized than a lot of the other Moroccan cities. So I really like this relaxed vibe, and the fact that it's like the fourth largest city in Morocco, so it's not so chaotic, especially if you're spending a lot of time in Casablanca, which has something like 5 million people. In comparison, Tangier has like 1 million people. So you're not gonna get caught up in a lot of bad traffic. Your driving isn't necessarily an issue. Getting around the city isn't necessarily an issue, as the majority of the expat community or the foreigners live in kind of a similar place. So as long as you're in the city center, there's really no need for a car. It's very, very comfortable. So that's one thing I really appreciated about Tangier versus some of the other Moroccan cities. The third awesome part about living in Tangier definitely has to do with its position and also the travel possibilities, as it is interconnected on Morocco's new and amazing high-speed rail system. So Tangier sits just on the north coast of Morocco, very, very close to Spain. So in normal times when COVID isn't a thing, there are actually boats that go between Morocco and Spain, and you can take a ferry for a pretty reasonable price that will get you to the EU quite quickly if you have the correct visa. Tangier is also the northern point of the new, it's called Al Barak, I'm pretty sure, the new high-speed rail system. And this connects Tangier all the way to Casablanca. A trip that used to take around like 5 hours now takes just about 2 hours. The high-speed train is super efficient, really quite good price. You can get to Casablanca or Rabat in just about 2 hours for just about, I don't know, something like $20, no more, no less than that. So this really creates an awesome place to live if you do like to travel and if you do want to see the country. You can go to the middle of the country, and then from there you can travel to all the different parts of Morocco quite easily. So even though it's kind of far away from a lot of the places people want to visit, it's a really good hub for tourism, which I definitely respect. The airport in Tangier is not the best connected airport, and there are not a lot of really convenient flights, but that means you can fly to Rabat or to Casablanca, and it's not a big deal as it's just one commuter train away from being in the city. The fourth amazing thing that I just love about Tangier is the food culture, and specifically the tapas culture when drinking. So since it's kind of an international city, you can of course find all of the great, lovely Moroccan food, and specifically the northern Amazigh or Berber food that kind of goes with that. But they do especially well is their tapas. And my favorite thing about the city is when you go to any bar, not only are you going to get a beer or a wine or whatever for a very fair price, but along with that, completely for free, you're going to get an entire plate of just beautiful fried fish, grilled meats, sometimes a salad, sometimes a fruit plate. There's this amazing restaurant in the city center of Tangier called Cour de Tangier. It's a very strange experience. It means the heart of Tangier. And inside you'll find a very weird party vibe with very traditional kind of Arabic Moroccan music, you know, a live singer, people drinking, enjoying the evening. But you can get a good beer for a good price, and more specifically, you can get, along with that beer, an entire dinner. So the funny part is when you go out to drink in Morocco, sometimes you end up eating 5 dinners on accident, which may not kind of be what you're looking for. But for me, it was one of the best pros. And so this is one of the only countries I would recommend eating the bar food for sure. The last point I want to make that's a pro about Tangier is that the price overall is very good for foreigners. Getting an apartment is a little bit expensive, but other than that, you can eat for probably around $3 to $4, and you can get really good food like a full meal. The alcohol is more expensive because it's taxable because it's a Muslim country, but in general, it's not that expensive. And you can even go to a pretty fancy restaurant and get like some really nice stuff for less than $15. So every experience that you're looking for, you can pretty much find for a pretty fair price. You have to remember that the local Moroccans, unless they're working in some sort of finance or IT sector, aren't making that much money, somewhere between $500 and $800 a month. And that would be like pretty good salary. So if you're living in the city center, but especially if you're not living in the city center, life can be incredibly cheap. So if you're looking for a place that's comfortable with all of the things that you kind of need from a European or westernized sort of ideal, but with a very Moroccan lifestyle, I think Tangier is an awesome middle ground, whereas Marrakesh is much more Middle Eastern feeling, so it can feel sometimes overwhelmingly different. I feel like Tangier is the middle ground between both worlds, which is why they call it the bipolar city, the city that's both cosmopolitan Europe and that sort of wild, very interesting North Africa. So that'll be the pros, and now of course we have to talk about the cons, so let's get into that. The first con I will want to say is that as a tourist city itself, Tangier is pretty small, and if you're living there to kind of experience the Moroccan lifestyle, I wouldn't say it's the best city to do that in. I think there's other more interesting cities that you could live in. So the Medina, this kind of touristy, like small alley city, the kind of historical city in Tangier, comparison to almost every other Moroccan city I went to, was very unimpressive. You can walk around it in probably 30 minutes, 40 minutes. They do call it the White City, so it is very pretty. But it's maybe not the experience that everyone's kind of hoping for when they go to Morocco. So the good news about Tangier is they have very new districts with nice housing, modern housing. So if that's what you're looking for, it could be a really good reason to live in Tangier. But if you're looking for a really traditional Moroccan experience, I'm not sure it's the best city to necessarily be in. Con number 2 is specifically about the weather, but it goes with the housing infrastructure, as I actually think the weather in Tangier probably is pretty nice normally in most cases. So in the summer, it can get really hot. It can get into the upper 30s, lower 40s, apparently. And in the winter, it can get kind of cold. It'll never get freezing, of course, but you'll have this kind of rainy 8 degrees, 7 degrees situation. So we're talking low 50s, almost to 100. So the issue is that a lot of the houses are kind of poorly built or built with bad materials. So especially in the winter, and it could be in the summer too, the houses are really poorly insulated. So I assume in the summer they get really, really hot. I didn't live there in the summer, but this is what I've heard. So a lot of places when you're renting don't necessarily have ACs, unless you're getting like a really expensive place. So the summers can be brutally hot. And then in the winter, they're really poorly insulated. So the inside of the apartments are really cold. And I noticed this from all of the friends that I had in Morocco. Everyone said in the winter, your house is just really, really cold. And there's really nothing you can do for this except to use more blankets or to get a space heater, as there's basically there's no interconnected heating systems in any of these apartment buildings as well. So I found that really not great. And I was there in November, start of December, and my house was really like 10 degrees, like just 65 degrees every day, which for some would be fine. For me, being a very cold person, was not ideal for sure. So something to be aware of. The third con that I'll say is getting around the city isn't necessarily the easiest, especially if you don't speak Arabic or are afraid of using taxis. So they do have a taxi app. It's called Kareem, which you can find all throughout the Arab-speaking world. But it doesn't work very well in Tangier. It's really hard to get a taxi to actually come pick you up. They do the shared taxi system, so you can hail a taxi and it goes in a direction, and then that means anyone can really hop in and out of your taxi on the way. So sometimes you'll end up going kind of indirect ways that are towards the general direction in which you're going to, which can take a lot longer than you're expecting. And then also if it's rush hour, since a lot of people in Morocco use taxis, it's a big taxi country, there could just be no taxis available. So just getting around the city can be quite challenging, as the bus infrastructure, it works, but for a foreigner, it's a bit confusing, and it's probably not the experience that you're looking for. So actually a lot of local Moroccans, if they can afford it, they'll get a car. It can be somewhat congested in Tangier, but not overly congested. But I think if you want to get around, if you want to get in and out of the city in a convenient way, you just have to really have a local show you how to understand the taxi system, because it can be very confusing, very frustrating, and can feel sometimes sketchy at times, although I've never had any problem taking any taxis in Morocco. Con number 4, I would say, is expensive short-term accommodation. So living in Tangier, Rabat, Casablanca shouldn't be that expensive in general. Most people, if you're in a reasonable part of the city, you can rent an apartment for $300 to $400 a month. In a better part of the city, maybe you can rent for something like $500 a month, $550 a month, but that means it's really nice. What I saw when looking for Airbnbs is that the prices were really crazy, like $1,400 a month, $1,800 a month. The apartments were very large, which was nice, but some of them weren't necessarily modern, and it's not really reasonable for one person or two people to have like a 4-bedroom apartment for $2,000 a month. So what I would recommend is that if you see apartments on Airbnb and you want to stay a bit longer, contact the person directly and ask for a better price. Of course, this is something that is a bit risky, because, for example, for me, I ended up getting an apartment in a dead zone. So I ended up having to move because I wasn't able to work at my apartment, and they didn't refund me any money because I didn't have any rights because I didn't use Airbnb. So if you're willing to take the risk, I think if you contact the people, they'll give you a much better price. But also realize that for almost everything in Morocco, there's a local Moroccan price and then there's a foreigner price. So you're going to get kind of ripped off, but I think that's kind of the norm in many countries around the world. So it depends kind of what experience you're looking for. But be aware that the prices can be high for foreigners, especially if you don't speak French. The last con that I will say, especially for an expat, is that the internet in Morocco is garbage. I went all over the country. The cell phone connection is reasonable, but the Wi-Fi in many apartments doesn't work. And when it does work, it works incredibly slowly. So I was using Orange, which was it's a telecommunications company, and the internet was just really bad. I had to use my phone for a lot of my work, and even in a lot of places you get dead spots with the phone. You can also get Morocco Telecom. I've heard some things better with them. Also, I've heard really bad things about their service and their connection. I just noticed Morocco has slow internet, so don't expect to be doing anything extremely interesting on the internet. For example, it would take me almost a full calendar day to upload one YouTube video, which could be 10 minutes long. So if you need to do something with a lot of upload download, Morocco is not your country, and Tangier is not friendly for that. So they don't have a lot of fiber optic connection apparently in the entire city. So something to be aware of. One last thing I wanted to say, which I always like to bring up because it's important when you travel to new places and not to be judgmental. They have a lot of homeless children and just unlooked after young people in Morocco. And so my first thing that I saw when I went to Tangier was a group of children sniffing glue, or they sometimes call it jet fuel in Africa. And it's just, it's a drug that makes people kind of hallucinate. So if you walk around, especially if you're a woman at night, it can be a little bit scary because these kids are just really unregulated by the government. Everyone just kind of lets them do what they want to do. So there were multiple times where I was harassed by people who were high on glue, and oftentimes would grab me. And that's not necessarily something that's good. I mean, obviously it's not good, but it's not necessarily harmful. It just depends on who you are as a person, but it's just really sad to see. And the secondary part is that there is really rampant prostitution in Morocco. I was actually very surprised on how much there was, considering it's an Islamic country, but they're really everywhere. So as just a single man, if you're traveling, it's just something to be aware of when you go. As a woman, I'm not sure how much that affects you, but be careful who you talk to sometimes because maybe things are not as they seem. All things being equal, I will say that Tangier is definitely my favorite city in Morocco. I went to something like 7 different cities, and Tangier, it's just got that really nice vibe, the place where you want to stay, drink a nice cup of mint tea, have a cigarette, and hang out. So it's just, the food's great. People, if you meet local Tangiawis, as they're called, they're super friendly. And it's a city with a lot of historical background. So if you like stories about Truman Capote or Ernest Hemingway and this sort of old idea of the artists coming and smoking hash and writing and sort of living this artistic lifestyle, that's still very much a part of the story of Tangier. If you really like beautiful old Medinas, beautiful mosques, and just a very relaxed place to grab a cup of coffee, I really think this is the city for you. So that being said, guys, if you have any questions about Morocco, if you have any questions about living in Tangier, please comment below. Super happy to answer any questions you may have. I love my time there, and I do have a lot of friends, so if you need someone to hang out with, also hit me up. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell, super helpful to me. We're going to be doing a lot more of these kind of informational travel videos, and I'm going to start a new podcast about how you can become an expat yourself. Ways you can save money abroad, ways you can make money abroad, ways you can move abroad, the sort of like tips and tricks of how I do it. I'm very ready to start sharing, how I've been living the last couple of years. It's been an adventure for me, and I would love you guys to have your adventures as well. So that's going to be it for me. Shokran Bisef, as they say in Moroccan, Arabic, also called Darija. And we will see you next time. Assalamu alaikum and marhaba.